David's had an illustrious career with the Department of Foreign Affairs, which includes his work as the Irish ambassador at the UN during the negotiation of the 2030 agenda, and really bringing that to unanimous agreement among all nation states, which is a very big accomplishment. But through his career, things in Northern Ireland have been sort of always been brewing in one way or another since his early days. And today is also the UN International Day of Conscience. And I'd say giving David's role in promoting the culture of peace in SDG 16, especially in Northern Ireland, and in his really key role in negotiating the Good Friday Agreement as well, I'd like to honor you for that work that you've done. So thank you for that. So without further ado, if you'd give us a little bit of insight on the 2030 agenda.
Thanks very much, John. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward very much to Stephen Sterling's address, and I'm really just the curtain raiser for it. I'll give you a kind of a whirlwind tour in 5 or 10 minutes through the SDGs, how they came about, what their current prospects are, how the world views them, and I hope that I can cover as many points of interest as possible. You'll all remember the Millennium Development Goals, and forgive me, some of you in the room will be far more expert than others perhaps, so I'll try and pitch it as a kind of an average understanding of the SDGs. The Millennium Development Goals were a set of goals which were effectively written on the back of an envelope by a couple of UN officials. I don't mean that in any disparaging way, but they were simply written in the year 2000 and announced by the Secretary General. They were not actually negotiated. They didn't bear the imprint of every country in the world. So a number of insights were developed really after the MDGs. One was that we needed to have a much wider agenda which would be faithful to the 3 dimensions of sustainable development. That's the economic, the social and the environmental dimensions. So number one, there was a sense that we had to devise a much broader agenda which recognized the interconnections and the interdependence between one dimension and another. There was a view that the Millennium Development Goals had been too much focused on traditional development objectives, as in health, education, but seen very much from a global north perspective, where in effect the global north was telling the global south what it needed to do in order to get, for example, development assistance. So there was a sense that, number one, we had to widen the agenda. Number two, we had to involve every country in the world in agreeing that agenda. And number three, we had to have a single set of commitments, or we should aim for a single set of commitments which would bind, at least politically, not legally unfortunately, but which would bind politically all the countries in the world. So my particular role was that I was asked to co-chair these negotiations with the ambassador of Kenya. So you can see the balance between north and south, and that meant that we in large part had to actually produce drafts of the document, and we had to get it through, as John was saying. We had to get the agreement of all 193 countries. So the 2030 agenda is the official name for a package which has the 17 goals and the 169 targets as its core. But in addition, there is a declaration, there is material about the means by which we hoped to achieve the goals, financial and non-financial means. And then there was a section also on monitoring progress. The latter 2 points had more or less been omitted from the MDGs. In other words, what we need in order to achieve the goals and how we're going to measure and monitor progress. So the entire package is called the 2030 Agenda, but often we just say the SDGs as an abbreviation. Roughly speaking, the 15-year period devoted to achieving these goals, we're now halfway through. On the one hand, there have been 2 enormous shocks. Well, at least 2. One is obviously the pandemic and all the ramifications that it had internationally, and the other would be the Russia-Ukraine war and all the ramifications it is having, especially on the poorest developing countries. There have been many others, including the fact that climate change continues unabated. We have a spiraling number of conflicts. So there are many other challenges, some of which we could have predicted. Others, such as the pandemic, we couldn't really have predicted. So you might imagine that because of those various shocks to the system, that there would now be a sense of disillusionment about the SDGs. And to be honest, I thought that there would be. I thought that certainly by the second half, when we saw that progress wasn't really at the level hoped for, I expected that there would be some disappointment. Oddly enough, and you can speculate about why, there has never been greater support for the SDGs if you measure it in terms of the commitment shown by practically every country in the world. One way in which we measure it is the number of countries who come to give a report each year on their national progress. This is called the High-Level Political Forum. It meets in New York, but the particular national report is called the Voluntary National Review, VNR. Ireland has already done 2 of them, and that would be an approximate average. Some countries have done 3 or 4. Only 5 countries out of the 193 have not done any. Most of them you can understand. They are countries in the throes of existential crises like Afghanistan, Somalia, and so on. One of them is the United States, which for complicated reasons has not yet done a national review, even though it is supposedly signed up, like everybody else, to the agenda. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that it is politically binding. That was as much as we could hope to achieve. A set of commitments announced with great formality by the largest gathering of leaders there had ever been at the UN. That was in 2015. But it would have been unrealistic to imagine that the commitments in them would be legally binding. Take, for example, let's say a tiny developing state in the South Pacific. It barely has administration, let alone a central statistics office. It would not be in a position to hold itself to account. It feared that its performance would look bad compared to other more affluent, more organised countries. And since we wanted to get unanimity for this new agenda, we had to have something that everybody would feel comfortable with. Answer, we could only have commitments which would have a certain political or moral force even, but which would not involve sanctions if a country fails to make the required progress on time. The final point I make, and I'm sure, Don, I'm almost up with my 10 minutes. The final point is that we have an odd situation at the moment where everybody knows that there's only 6 or 7 years left. Measured in terms of progress on the targets, on the sort of the individual, more detailed sub-goals, as it were, we're only at, we are on track for 15% of them. 15% of the 169 targets. That, of course, is fairly woeful. It should have been more like maybe 50% if everything had gone well. But that is not disheartening countries, oddly enough. The reaction is we now have to knuckle down and do more than ever in order to achieve all the goals by 2030. I'm not a hopeless romantic. I know it is highly unlikely that we will do that. But it's as if people want to show that they're making the effort. And then I think what will quietly happen is that they will be relabeled, would be my guess. They will be, in effect, represented, perhaps with some additions, developments. I don't think there'll be any subtraction from the goals. I think that this agenda is with us for the foreseeable future. Nobody has actually questioned the substance of the goals. They all say they're highly ambitious. I know they're highly ambitious. But oddly enough, the current reaction globally is we just have to make an even bigger effort to achieve them. I'll leave that to you to judge whatever way you like. I'll let go of that, but that was intended to be kind of a quick race through past, present, and the future of the SDGs.